Introduce Holly Taylor, who is a faculty member and a research bioethicist at the National Institutes of Health Department of Bioethics. She has a PhD in health policy from Johns Hopkins, has served on a number of IRBs in different settings, and her research focuses on research ethics, including informed consent, subject selection and recruitment, and research oversight. She is the co-chair of 2 national groups, which full disclosure, I'm pretty psyched to have had the opportunity to participate with and join in the last month or so. One of them is the Clinical Research Ethics Consultation Collaborative, or CREC. That's a group of mostly members of clinical research ethics consultation services. So many of you will be familiar with our clinical ethics consultation service at the hospital. Some research institutions also have a service that's devoted to research ethics, and this group is a consortium of representatives of those different programs who get together to talk about some of the trickiest cases in research ethics around the country. And she also co-chairs the Consortium to Advance Effective Research Ethics Oversight, or AREO, which is dedicated to improving IRB effectiveness. And so, as you could imagine, Holly has a lot of wisdom to share with members of IRBs about kind of lessons learned and pearls and pitfalls for us from a research ethics perspective. And so, without further ado, I will hand it over to Holly.
Thank you, Ben. Very much appreciate that. And I am going to share my slides. And I'm going to talk about, as Ben mentioned, this work that I've been doing with that second group, AREO, on the topic of IRB quality and effectiveness. And I'm going to sort of buzz through many of our slides. I'm going to share these. I'll share these with Ben so you guys can look at them later. And also just want to share a sort of sneak peek at a project that I'm leading, just to give you a sense of the types of things that we work on. So I can't see you, though I'm not sure. Well, I'll just continue. Quick disclaimer.
Heads are nodding.
Oh, good. I am, as Ben mentioned, I am at the National Institutes of Health. So you get this handy disclaimer that says all of these views are my own and not of the federal government. So what I'm going to talk about is sort of challenges measuring IRB quality, and tell you a little bit about what our group has been trying to tackle, give you perhaps not pearls of wisdom, but rough rocks of wisdom, and I'm happy to chat further and or today or in the future about our group. So the big question that we're motivated by is, when we want to assess quality, we usually look at outcomes. And if you look at outcomes as they relate to what IRBs and larger as HRPPs do, you want to protect participants, promote socially valuable research, foster a culture of ethical concern, promote trust in research. Now, the challenge is that these things are challenging to actually measure. They can be—
Holly, really quickly.
Yeah.
I can see the PowerPoint, but the slides haven't advanced at all. I'm not sure if if you intended for them to.
I did. So I'm using the little clicker at the bottom of the page.
What we see is we don't see the presentation mode. We see the other mode.
How strange. I'm going to stop sharing, apologize, and see if I can do this again. So I'm going to try to share again. And I thought that I was sharing the tab. Oh, best laid plans. I had it all, set up here.
No worries.
Okay. It's a 50-50 kind of shot, this is—
Yeah, I guess you're right.
I mean, it's totally okay.
So now it's showing up on my screen, but not on the share screen. So how about this? I am just going to tell you the story of what my slides say, and I'll share the slides later, so you don't have to take any notes or any do anything other than just listen patiently to me, and we can talk about what I'm telling you about. So
Sounds good.
So no slide here, but the idea is that when we talk about things like protecting participants, it's really hard to measure what we mean by that, right? As IRBs, we're in charge of review and oversight. We have the possibility of observing consent. We might look at adverse events, et cetera, but there aren't right now measures that are available off the shelf to get a handle on some of these really important topics. So we don't have useful, what you might call performance measures. And therefore, we're sort of at a disadvantage in thinking about how we might look at whether an IRB is doing a good job or a not so good job. So this consortium that Ben mentioned, we have 3 goals. We've been around now for about 5 years, and our goal is to evaluate and improve effectiveness in achieving outcomes of interest, like the ones I mentioned, evaluate the benefits of IRB oversight in contrast to other types of oversight, and then do empirical studies to support evidence-based approaches to research ethics review and policy. And we thought, we had a bit of a fantasy when we started that we would have an outcome measure to share with everyone. But as you all know, that would be challenging. No one has come up with one yet. And so here is what we think are the key components of a definition related to the effectiveness of IRB review. Well-trained, well-supported IRB members that have the appropriate expertise to carefully deliberate on the ethics and regulatory compliance of proposed and ongoing research in ways that promote participant protection and understanding, while partnering with researchers to facilitate ethical, compliant research without imposing overly burdensome or inefficient requirements or reviews. And we've sort of put these pieces together as the result of a whole bunch of different empirical projects. I'll send, just as an FYI, a link also to our website where all of our publications are listed. So what I'm going to share with you really quickly are some what we would refer to as empirically supported recommendations based on the work that we've done so far. So one is clearly to attend to compliance, but minimize what's been referred to as the audit culture, which focuses on achieving metrics for their own sake, right? Like how quickly do you review? Now, fast might be good, not so fast might be good. What are the tensions in those trade-offs? Is fast the most important thing, or does that have to be balanced with protecting subjects and reviewing the science, for example? So if you just measure how quick it is from arrival at the IRB to back to the investigator, that may not be the best measure of effectiveness. So of course, it's important to be compliant, but to also attend to the substance. Prioritize assessments directly related to participant protection outcomes. So issues around consent, understanding of the consent, adverse event review, how adverse events are going to be reported, and the sort of overall participant experience in research. Another would be to emphasize the assessment of processes and standards likely to promote participant protection. And another way to say that would be, how does the IRB, as much as it can, systematically identify and quantify, if possible, the risks that are expected, and or get a handle on the types of benefits that might happen if the research is successful, and obviously making sure the balance of those two components are, maximize the potential benefit and minimize the risk. Again, you guys know that verbiage anyway. Make sure reviewers are fully informed about the relevant details of the proposed and ongoing research. Examine the extent of meaningful discussion and debate about key ethical and regulatory issues. And I'm going to talk just briefly about deliberation in a moment. Promote diversity, expertise, and independence among board members. Appreciate and utilize the expertise of unaffiliated and non-scientific IRB members. We did a recent survey and found that, bottom line, they're not being used to their full potential. Periodically inventory content areas of expertise that are represented on the committee and consult external experts to fill gaps in member expertise. Encourage reliance on prior decisions to promote consistency where appropriate. And include attention to whether and how the HRPP, the sort of larger office, monitors the conduct research beyond the protocol review. And finally, adopt assorted quality assessments that incorporate feedback from what we think are the key stakeholders: the board members, the HRPP staff, research teams, study participants, and others. And what I'm going to do really briefly, because I think this is sort of part of the fun of the work that we do, is I'm going to talk very briefly about deliberation. So we did a study that was published in Social Science and Medicine in 2022, where a whole variety of experts in IRB quality and effectiveness were interviewed. And according to their views, and I'm just going to read the quote here, a high-quality IRB could be described as one in which a well-trained, well-supported IRB members with appropriate expertise carefully deliberate on the ethics and regulatory compliance of the proposed and ongoing research. So we picked up on that idea and considered where in the review process can or should deliberation happen, and talk then about what does that deliberation look like in an ideal, and consider if and how we could do additional research to find out how it might actually work, and then try to think about ways in which the ideal and the actual might be brought together. So our current sort of model of deliberation is careful consideration that includes the identification of key concerns, a statement of opinions, reason giving and justifications, weighing of reasons, conclusions and justifications, and then a consensus or majority. And in the ideal, right, you'd want something that's in between, generally, no deliberation and too much deliberation. So no deliberation might just be a rubber stamp. Too much deliberation might be over a proposal that is really great and you're attending to wordsmithing, for example. That might be too much deliberation, sort of arguing about which word might be best. You might have no deliberation about an exceptional review by the IRB office. Those who support what's going on in the IRB have done such a great job that there's not much to deliberate about. So in the end, the idea would be that if there is a high quality deliberation, and we could actually measure that, which is the key component, that might be a way to systematically think about deliberation as one of the components of the IRB review. And as you guys know, and what we've been doing is sort of breaking the process into smaller components that we can look at really carefully and sort of take apart what's going on so that we can put all the things back together. And my guess is that you guys are already engaged in a whole variety of activities like the ones I described. And our hope is in the not too distant future to have tools available that might help IRBs identify what, if any, deficiencies they might have in trying to, have a goal of high quality and of effectiveness, and be able to say, we are a, high quality and effective organization because we are accomplishing these types of mini outcomes that could be then added up to a larger outcome. So I hope that was of some interest. And there's at least one person who is part of a group that's really interested in how IRBs work more generally, with the goal of facilitating really good, high quality IRB review and oversight. Happy to take any questions. I know you also have a meeting to get to, but happy to answer any questions. And as I said, I'll share my slides with Ben, and my email is on there if anyone has any questions later.
Well, I think it's thought-provoking, and the question that I will say is rhetorical, because I don't want to put anybody in a tough spot, but to ask ourselves where we fit on that spectrum.
Yeah.
And again, I'll leave that as one to ponder.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you about. I think I heard you say that IRBs in general are not optimally using unaffiliated members. Did I hear that right?
Yes, you heard that exactly right.
Can you expand on that?
I sure can. So as you guys know, the regulations say that here's the minimum number of people one must have on their IRB, and there needs to be one unaffiliated and one non-scientist member. So what we did was we did a survey of IRBs and asked them about, first, do you have one person who fits that role? Do you have two people? And or if you have multiple IRBs, do you have one or two on each? A lot of IRBs have, almost all IRBs have at least one person who's filling that job. Almost no IRB has more than two people filling that job. Now, that meets the standard in the federal regulations, right? The challenge then, but we then ask them a series of questions about how they think about that person's role, how they prepare them for that role, how they recruit for people to fill that role. It sounds like you have an amazing candidate who may be joining you. But for example, the vast majority of IRBs reported that they recruit for unaffiliated and non-scientist members from within their institution. Now, that's even for the unaffiliated. It's like, Ben's brother is a teacher in the local school district, so he becomes the unaffiliated member and maybe the non-scientist member. So there is a lot of room for reaching outside of the institution. In terms of what's expected of those individuals, very little, which I think is a bad thing. So for example, they say, well, not in these exact words, but we sometimes have them look at the consent form. How often do they speak up in the meeting? Almost never. So another way to say that is there are people who are sometimes volunteering, sometimes getting some sort of honorarium to fill a role on the IRB that is not well defined, that is not well supported, that is not appreciated in the way that it might be. That another way to say that is there's a focus on meeting the letter of the law.
Right.
There must be one or two who are like this, but the spirit of the person that you want to have is neglected in terms of empowering them to have a voice and contribute. And it turns out, just as a quick aside, in New Zealand, all their research ethics committees have to have at least one more lay member than scientists. So if they have 5 scientists, they have to have 6 lay members, et cetera, et cetera. So there are different models out there, but I would posit that the average IRB is not doing as good a job as they could to tap into the expertise that that person has. And part of the question is, what expertise are we hoping they're going to bring? Is it as a patient, a former patient, a patient, you know, someone who lives in the community, someone who's familiar with the community? There's so much work that could be done in thinking about how to raise the expectations in a really positive way for the person that is there who is either unaffiliated or a non-scientist or have a couple more of them, because it's also the case that as a single community member, as Ben mentioned, I have sat on more IRBs than I'd like to count. It's usually just one person, and putting a non-scientist in a room with a bunch of MD PhDs who are speaking what might sound like a foreign language, it can be really intimidating to feel like your experience and knowledge can make a difference.
That's
I'll share that article with you too, Ben, so you can share it with the group.
I want to make sure we give others the opportunity to ask any questions of Dr. Taylor. Questions from anyone else or comments?
Ben knows where to find me, so I'm happy